Hello, my name is Nicholas Ryan Barrett Myers, or Nicholas R.B. Myers, as I go by in my author name, and I am an aspiring novelist and composer. I have been working on my writing and music composition since the end of my school years, but even before then, I've been coming up with countless songs, stories, and characters in my mind. As a kid, I wasn't able to clearly express anything I thought up to others due to anxiety about what they would think of it. And most of that anxiety comes from second-guessing myself. Even now, I feel nervous explaining my work. But if I know that I push through it, the reward will be worth it. Today, I'd like to talk to you about the novel I'm currently working on, and the one that is also the most important to me. Allow me to read you an excerpt from the harrowing Odyssey of Gilbert Montgomery. A young man woke up from his dream in a bar. "Finally done with your beauty rest?" a rough voice asked him. He was a tall man in his early 20s with an athletic frame. He had short, messy, straight brown hair complemented by well-defined, thick, hard-angled eyebrows that hung over deep gray eyes with even deeper eye bags, and pointed sideburns that ended halfway down the length of his ears. He wore a brown cotton-lined jacket, well-worn jeans that had lost their blue hue years ago, fashioned by a simple leather belt, and white cotton socks underneath dirty hiking boots. The young man let his head fall as quickly as he shot it up, putting his forehead back onto his hands. A wave of sound hit him, but he couldn't tell what it was. "Come on, pal, keep your head up," the voice ordered him. "I let you nap for long enough." Was all he could respond with. The sound hit him again, and this time he could register it. It was the sound of people laughing their guts out. Begrudgingly, he looked around to see everyone in the bar laughing at him, then towards the irritated-looking geriatric bartender frowning at him, and finally down to the latest issue of Titanium Man he was reading, and the half-full glass of water he ordered. All the clues clicked together in his mind. Oh no, he thought. He had gone into a dive bar, ordered just water, and fell asleep reading a comic book. Rookie mistake. He wasted no time waking himself up. Getting off the stool, he pulled the $5 bill out of his wallet, slapped it onto the counter for the water, and carefully grabbed his book, conscious of not damaging it. "Sorry about that," he said to the bartendress, even though he didn't have anything to apologize for. Without missing a beat, he sped for the door. An outstretched arm the size of his leg blocked the exit. He sighed and turned to his right, seeing the largest middle-aged giant he'd ever seen in his life grinning down at him tauntingly. His 6'2" stature was far outclassed by a hulking 7'1" mass of round muscle in a black turtleneck coat and beanie. "You're a little too young to be drinking your woes away, kid," he told him sarcastically. More laughter ensued from the bar's patrons. Like a rugged group of bikers, a pair of elderly grouches, and a plain sir. "Oh, I don't drink," he replied earnestly. "I just needed some water and a place to sit down and unwind for a minute. I'll get out of your hair now." He tried to push past his arm when it shoved him backwards. The giant got out of his booth and put himself between him and the door, looking somewhat ticked off. "Was it something I said just now?" he wondered anxiously, right as the giant pulled off his beanie, showing a little shining example of male pattern baldness. "Oh no." "There's a cafe down the block," the old man said with a scowl. "I reckon that'd be a better place for teetotalers like yourself, wouldn't you say?" The word got some chuckles out of the onlookers in the bar. The young man was a little confused by that because he actually knew what a teetotaler was, and it wasn't really an insulting thing to call somebody. He didn't really care about that, though. He just wanted to leave. "Listen, this was the only place open this late at night, all right? I'm not telling anybody what they should and shouldn't be doing. I can see that I'm not welcome here, so I'll just go, okay?" Jeers erupted from the crowd. This was a treat for them. It wasn't every night a wet behind the ears city boy ran into old Angus Boss. Angus's face was red, either from the beer he was holding or from his boiling anger. He really hated people like this. He had lived a tough life that forced him to grow a hard shell and a bitter temperament. It was impossible for him to take this person's passive attitude. This kid who clearly didn't go through half the hardships he endured as anything other than an insult. "Who are you?" he demanded. "A playboy that lives off his daddy's scraps? One of those crypto morons?" The young man hesitated. Now that was insulting. "The name's Gilbert Montgomery," he answered. "I'm a drifter." He took a long breath. "And look, I get it. Laugh at me all you want, but I don't want to get into a fight tonight. Please just let me through." The bar fell silent. His words didn't have any kind of fear behind them, nor were they meek or irresolute. With conflict becoming unavoidable, his true colors were starting to show. That confidence rubbed old Angus the wrong way. And so did that name, Gilbert Montgomery. It was a name begging to have his face caved in. You never had bullies growing up, did you, Gilbert? He asked, positioning his arm into an overhand swing. I bet you can't even throw up. A meaty pound resounded throughout the bar, like somebody slamming a mallet into a wad of dough. Everyone flinched at the sudden noise, then looked to see what happened. All they saw was Angus frozen in place, his face as red as a cherry, and the young man's fist driven into his gut. The giant, paralyzed with shock, looked at the one man who ever cracked his shell wide open in the eyes. A silent, withheld fury flared through them like waves crashing into a cliffside. I tried to warn you, he told him. I didn't want to hurt anybody tonight. With a resolution he didn't want to reach, Gilbert Montgomery released his punch, sending the old man crashing onto the floor, sucking for fresh air. The fury was gone from the drifter's eyes as soon as it had appeared, replaced with regret and shame. He took a sigh, clutched his comic book tightly, and walked out the door without a single laugh behind his back. The town of Hade does not have a spot on the map of Yule County. It has the least land in its township. The population of no more than 3,200 has been gradually waning in the past 3 decades, and its most historically relevant footnote is a serial killer that terrorized the town in the 1970s. It is not a kind place to strangers. Gilbert Montgomery walked northward through the slumbering streets of this unfamiliar town in low spirits, holding the Titanium Man comic close to his heart. Being in a new place, especially at night, always made him feel anxious, but he would endure it. He always endured it. He didn't lie to that man when he said he was a drifter. As soon as he had graduated from high school, he had packed some supplies, got in his car, and drove. For the past 2 years, his life has been on the highway, taking odd jobs whenever he could to stay well-fed and clean. It was a dangerous life to live, and one that many would judge him for. But he was happy with what he had. He had learned so much more and met so many more great people from traveling the country than he ever did stuck in a classroom or an office. That being said, the road often got lonely at times like this. He may have been free to go wherever the road took him, but not every place was welcoming to people like him. Angus wasn't the only person who treated him like they didn't belong today. Ever since he had driven into this town, he's been getting nothing but looks that screamed, "You're not welcome here." He was too much of a maverick for common folk, but he was too clean-cut to be a bad boy either. When friendly faces were nowhere to be found, that isolation he felt could be crushing. Gilbert's car was in a parking lot on the other side of town. That's where he was heading. He didn't usually leave a new place this early, especially not after such a long drive between populations. At most, he would spend a few days looking around and chatting with the locals. After the bar, however, it was clear that there was nothing for him here. He would get some actual shut-eye, then start driving in the morning. He was halfway to the lot when something stopped him in his tracks. In front of him, there was a small alleyway on the side of the street right before a crosswalk. He would have paid it no mind if he didn't hear the subtlest sounds of a struggle within the alleyway. The drifter had been in this kind of situation enough times to understand what it meant. Somebody was getting mugged, or worse. Gilbert looked to the crossing. There's no reason for me to get involved, he thought. If I passed by quickly without drawing attention to myself, I could call the police safely in my car and let them take care of it. Muffled shouting turned his gaze back to the alleyway. Are they going to be okay by then, though? His stomach twisted up into a knot. On one hand, whatever was going on behind that corner was none of his business. On the other hand, the thought of leaving a defenseless person in the hands of a thug made him feel sick. He was torn between what to do. Before he fell into a full-blown panic, he felt the pressure on his chest as he was clutching his comic book too hard. He relaxed his grip and looked down at the book's hero, Titanium Man, posing on the cover. Titanium Man had been Gilbert's comfort character since he was 7 years old. He had just gotten the latest issue earlier today in a little shop with some money he had saved up. Seeing his hero filled him with a sense of courage. It reminded him of his first days on the road when he was naive to what the world would throw at him. He remembered what it was like to be the one in the alleyway. Gilbert knew what he had to do. Without any hesitation, he rolled up the comic book, tucked it into his jacket pocket, and rounded the corner in a boxing stance. "Hey!" he yelled out in his most intimidating voice. What he saw in the alleyway was a pair of teenage delinquents roughhousing, one holding the other in a headlock, with their many friends loitering about, some cheering on the tussle, others focusing on their graffiti. When Gilbert shouted, everyone stopped what they were doing and turned their attention towards this random adult man that was picking a fight with them. The drifter broke out of his stance as he realized he had severely overestimated the situation. They looked at each other for a few seconds in awkward silence. One girl pulled herself off her boyfriend and picked up a metal bat behind the crate they were sitting on. "Sorry," Gilbert muttered sheepishly as he speed-walked back out the alleyway and down the sidewalk. He made it to the other side of the crosswalk when he heard one of them shout, "Get him!" The drifter glanced behind him to see an angry mob of teens pouring out the alleyway and charging after him with bats and pocket knives. When they entered the little light the lamp post provided, he could see that their clothes were really similar to one another. It was like they were part of a street gang or something. The dead silence of the night was broken by shouts of promised violence and the stamping of dozens of shoes as Gilbert sprinted through the empty streets of Hade with a local street gang in hot pursuit, frenzied for a beatdown. Gilbert looked behind his shoulder as he ran, seeing young faces filled with vigorous rage. These kids were like the old man in the bar, only on the opposite end of the spectrum. Where old Angus grew cold to the world's cruelty from a lifetime of exposure, this batch of fresh souls were white hot, their aggression fueled by fear and frustration. They were not fortunate enough to be born outside of this town littered with broken homes and shattered spirits, with no hope for escape to cleaner lands. Their only salvation was with justice, not the justice of the law that failed them, but the justice they enacted against those who would dare to threaten one of their own. Woe betide the fool that incites the wrath of starving dogs. It was difficult for the drifter to keep track, but there were about 3 blocks left between him and the parking lot. He didn't want to think about what would happen to him if he didn't get to it before they got to him. Thankfully for him, it should just be a straight path to his car. He looked back again to make sure they weren't catching up. It wasn't going to be easy to outrun 22 people, but he'd been through worse. Wait, his mind pointed out. Did I count 28 or 22 kids last time I checked? Gilbert directed his gaze back forward to 6 delinquents cutting him out of a shortcut up ahead. The drifter grinded his boots against the asphalt and dove into a nearby back street on his right. He heard teens funneling in after him, but he didn't risk looking back this time. Hastily, he flew out of the back street into a road with small, simple housing plots instead of brick-and-mortar buildings. The last thing the drifter wanted was to lose the main street. Without missing a beat, he went to continue north, only to see more street punks pouring out of a building corner and cutting him off. He turned to go the opposite direction, but another group had splintered off and doubled back to the south end of the street. He could see the remainder of them catching up to him from the back street. He was cornered. There was only one direction where armed, violent gangsters weren't running towards him. He looked to a house on his right with a small, fenced-off lawn. Oh man, he thought begrudgingly. I can never show my face in this town again after tonight. Gilbert yelled, took a running start, and leaped over the fence as the 3 groups of delinquents collided, a few of them unable to stop themselves from running into each other and crashing into the concrete. The drifter hit the landing perfectly and continues to run through the little yard. Those that weren't knocked to the ground climbed over the fence, too humiliated and enraged to let him escape. With no more effort than the first time, he jumped over the other side of the fence and landed it into the neighbor's yard. Then he did the same when he reached the end of that lawn. The repetition of running and jumping quickly became as impulsive to him as walking. Too much adrenaline was rushing through the drifter's mind now to think about where he was running to or what was happening around him. His one concern in the moment was to get away from the danger as fast and as far away as he could physically move. His pursuers tried to cut the distance between him and them, but the chase was all but finished here. Up until now, they had flat, open streets to their advantage. Gilbert, however, was more than accustomed to rugged terrain riddled with hazards that made it far easier to lose one's footing. While he effortlessly maintained his balance, one by one they fell behind, tripping over a motley of miscellaneous yard supplies. Several fell into an unlit pool. One got knocked to the ground by a huge guard dog. Another broke their nose on a garden rake. It didn't take long for him to cross the last house on the block, but he didn't stop running. He couldn't if he tried. He just kept going in a straight line, deep into a part of town he hadn't seen yet, unsure if he was still being tailed or not. The heart of Hade was usually indicated by a clock tower, over 150 years old. It had a brick-and-mortar base with a head of marble and a crown of oxidized copper. The clock's 4 marked faces and 8 arms in pairs of 2 were respectively positioned in the directions of north, south, east, and west, concealing the mighty bronze brain of the structure within. For the more culturally refined, it was a quaint architectural masterpiece, hidden in plain sight. Coincidentally, it was also in the center of a fairly sized parking lot, but that only mattered to the people who were using it. It was at the stroke of 9, when the first chime of the night sounded off, which would follow with 8 more consecutively to correctly state the current time. Some people believe the soul of their town resides in its clock tower. If that idea had some meaning to it, then perhaps the 4 faces of Hade's clock could see everything that transpired in its home. It could see the warm lights through the windows of apartments and homes alike as people prepared for bedtime. It could see the few spirits still out on the roads at this time, the select outliers that prospered without the eyes of society on them. It could see the equally innocent and malicious of those outliers. It could see the savant in yellow robes, the 3 harpy sisters, and the tattered wise man. He could see the party of checkered fools and the striped chauffeur. He could see the plainser, the mad beggar, the giant, and the pixie. He could see the brewing darkness hiding in the shadows, biding its time patiently for the finest hour of celebration. And most of all, he could see the drifter that wandered into town mere hours ago. This man, who had no clue of the destiny that awaited him. His journey would be one of indescribably perilous danger to mind, body, and soul, both unrelenting and undeserved, yet it would also reap extraordinary reward if conquered. Tonight, the spirit of Hade would be the sole witness to the harrowing Odyssey of Gilbert Montgomery. It probably couldn't see all of that, though. It was just a clock, after all.